Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Youth Career Mentorship session. Throughout this series, we have been learning how our talents and passions can be directed to the service of our communities, what principles should guide our work in order for this purpose to be fulfilled, how our work can build unity across cultures and peoples, and how work done in the spirit of service to others can unlock human capacity and release our creative powers. The presenters in this series have achieved excellence in their field of work and have applied their knowledge and expertise to address different types of social injustices and advance inclusion and equity at the local and global levels. Tonight, we are honored to have with us Mrs. Layli Muro, who is the founder and chief executive officer of the Tauhere Justice Center. She established Tauhere in 1997, following her involvement in a high-profile case that set national precedent and revolutionized asylum law in the United States. Fawzia Kassinja, a 17-year-old girl who had fled Togo in fear of a forced polygamous marriage and female genital mutilation, was granted asylum in 1996 by the US Board of Immigration Appeals. This decision opened the door to a gender-based persecution as grounds for asylum. Using her portion of the proceeds from a book she and Mrs. Kassinja co-authored about the case, Do They Hear You When You Cry?, Mrs. Muro established Tauhere. Since 2001, she has led Tauhere in its service to more than 22,000 women and children, growing the nonprofit from a staff of 6 to over 70, and expanding its offices from Greater DC to Houston, Baltimore, and the San Francisco Bay Area. In recognition of its sound management and innovative programs under Mrs. Muro's leadership, Tauhere won the Washington Post Award for Management Excellence and gained recognition for its innovative use of pro bono services in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. Mrs. Muro is a frequent lecturer and has appeared in numerous news outlets including CNN, Fox News, the New York Times, NPR, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. She lives in Washington, D.C. area with her husband and 3 children. As Mrs. Muro goes through her presentation, I encourage you to type your questions in the question and answer box. We'll go through some of these questions in the second half of the session. And with that, I'll give the floor to Mrs. Muro.
Thank you very much for having me, and for all of you who are here, who have an interest in thinking of your future and thinking of what you want to do in your career, and whatever small lessons there might be from those of us who've made many, many mistakes and can share those with you. So as it was mentioned, what I do is I work as a lawyer. I engage in the legal defense of women and girls who are fleeing human rights abuses. Being a lawyer was not always my goal, even though I went to law school. And so what I'll do is I'll share with you my own personal journey, and then pull out from that journey some lessons that may be transferable under the rubric of embracing discomfort and embracing opportunities to stretch, opportunities to grow, and to do what you think you're not capable of. So when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to go to West Africa, the Gambia specifically. And when I was in the Gambia, I was just in awe of the love and kindness and joy, and it was a happy place to be, and I loved it very much, and I loved the people that I was with. It was also a place filled with superstition, and violence against women was normal, and a practice known as female genital mutilation or female genital cutting was predominant in that culture. And so I learned of it there. And then when I came back to law school and I went to college. I was an anthropology major. I decided that I cared deeply about civil rights. I had a particular passion for race issues. I worked at the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta. And that was a very powerful experience. It allowed me to learn um, social change theory. We had to read Dr. King's works. We had to understand his theory of social change, which is very rich and very deep. And if you, I don't know if they teach it in school, they should. It's an amazing philosophy that he developed. He was also inspired by Gandhi. It was rooted in spiritual theology for him, and it just very, very interesting. But that experience allowed me to go deep on social change theory. And I was a racism or anti-racism trainer when I was at the Martin Luther King Center. That experience made me really want to devote my career to civil rights. It was a professor who suggested law school. I had a prejudice against lawyers. I think I hadn't seen the legal profession as a helpful one. I had seen it as like divisive or a way for rich people to make more money. And I wasn't terribly interested in it, but she convinced me that having a legal background would allow me to argue civil rights issues with grounding in the law. And so I thought, okay, this can be a good tool, a good backing. And then I decided to go to law school. When I was in law school, I decided to write a paper on the legality of female genital mutilation. So this experience I had had previously. At that time, it was not criminalized. It was also not a viable basis for protection under United States refugee and asylum laws. Part of the reason for that was because those laws were developed after World War II, and they weren't caring about gender back then. The way the law was written, it explicitly provided protection for race persecution, political persecution, religious persecution, and persecution based on nationality, but it didn't mention gender. So the law had this deficiency. And when I was in law school, I wrote a paper in law school about arguing essentially that you should be able to receive asylum because of gender-based persecution, or in particular, female genital mutilation. I then worked in the summer of my second year of law school for an immigration attorney. And when I worked for him, I was handed a case that would change my life. The case was this case of Fauzia Kasinga. Kasinja is her real name, but like many people who immigrate to the United States, the Immigration Service misspelled her name and she got stuck with it. So she was applying for asylum in the United States because of female genital mutilation. She was 17 years old. She was being forced into a polygamous marriage. She was going to be the fourth wife of a 45-year-old man. She did not want to marry him. She was a very intelligent, strong, powerful young woman who wanted to finish her schooling. Also, as a condition of the union of the marriage, she was going to be forced to undergo female genital mutilation. She had avoided that up until that point in her life, although it was normally performed on girls earlier, because her father was progressive and her father protected her, but he died suddenly. He died because of an asthma attack. And when he died, her protection ended. And so she was then forced to marry this man. She was going to be forced to undergo female genital mutilation, and she escaped on the day of her wedding. She ended up, it's a bit of a long story how she escaped. There is a book that's written about it if you want all of the details, but she made her way to the United States and applied for legal protection at our border, at our airport. And at the time, the law didn't protect her, and so she was incarcerated. Even though she committed no crime, she was put in maximum security prison facilities with American convicted felons, which is where immigration had contracts so that they could have the beds that were in these prisons. She was treated horribly. She was in detention in prison for over 18 months while her case was being adjudicated. And I had the honor of representing her as a law student. And that was possible because of this fortuitous combination of the fact that I happened to have spent time in West Africa. I wrote this paper arguing theoretically at the time that female genital mutilation should be a basis for protection. And then here was a real client who faced nearly identical facts to the paper that I wrote. And so I argued her case in front of the judge. We lost. It was appealed to the highest immigration appellate court. And at that level, her case received a lot of media attention. It was very debated publicly whether we should be giving protection to women and girls because of gender-based persecution. Her case climbed to the highest immigration appellate court, and she won. And so her case ended up setting legal precedent in the United States and changing the law. There was also commercial interest because her story was dramatic. I guess kind of the fact that a law student was helping her was interesting to people. And then it got a lot of press. And so she and I wrote a book together. It's called Do They Hear You When You Cry? And I used all of my portion of the proceeds of the book to start the Tahirih Justice Center, which is the organization that I now work with. And Tahirih has grown over the last 23 years. We're now in 5 cities throughout the United States. We have over 100 staff. We're litigating around 2,000 cases at any given time. And the need is great. There are so many women and girls who need legal protection, and they need free legal representation because unfortunately our legal system in the United States, the way it's designed is that you have to have a lawyer in order to win. And then the way the legal profession is designed, you have to have money in order to hire a lawyer. And so that leaves out hundreds and thousands of people in the United States who can't afford a lawyer, who then go without justice. And so it's a huge systemic problem. It's rooted in racism, it's rooted in patriarchy, it's rooted in preference for people who are wealthy. The system was designed that way. And so we're still dealing with how to correct it, how to amend it so that it really is about justice as opposed to just winning. The way the system is right now, it's more about winning. And then again, your odds of winning depend a lot on how much money you have and whether you can pay for a lawyer. So we try to play a small role in leveling the playing field by providing high quality lawyers for free for people who are fleeing human rights abuses. So backing up a little bit into what might be lessons learned in my own experience. One is that I think it's hard early to predict with any accuracy where the universe will take you. I think what we can do is set our intentions. And we can set goals and we can set strategies. And I'm a big believer in planning and being very intentional, and at the same time being open to kind of the intimations of the spirit, to be open to doors that open and doors that close and signs that you get that maybe this is the direction. And I mentioned before, I did not intend to be a lawyer. It was because of Fauzia's case that I learned you can actually help people in the courtroom with a law degree, and that opened up my door, kind of my mind to that particular door. Also, I cared deeply about race relations. I cared about human rights. I intentionally did not want to do women's rights. And the reason for that was because I went to a women's college and I had a wonderful experience at a women's college. But by the time I graduated, I felt like I was on overload with like a lot of women's rights issues. And I thought, you know, particularly as a white person, I felt a deep obligation to care passionately and do what I could to combat racism. And that's really where my passion was. But when I was in law school, I was competing, as all law students do, to write on a journal. There are all these law journals, and you compete and you rank the ones you want, and then you write something, they read your writing, and then they rank you. It's this like competitive matching process. And I had ranked every journal in the law school, and I put Journal of Gender in the Law last, like dead last. That's the one I wanted the least. And that's the one I got. And so it was kind of like, again, the universe is saying, you thought you didn't want to be a lawyer, but here, and then you didn't want to do women's rights, but I guess you should. There are all of these different things. I also thought, okay, well, if I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a pure, righteous human rights lawyer. And then I ended up working for a corporate law firm. And that was also a very strange thing that I resisted. And the reason that happened, so there's a law firm hiring process where law students at very good law schools. So first of all, I didn't even go to a great law school. I went to like a second tier law school. Most really large law firms only recruit at top tier law firms. The law firm I ended up working for only ever recruited at Ivy League law firms. I never competed for a summer associate position. And I didn't even go to a law school where they would have recruited, even if I had. And then really the only way to become a lawyer at a large law firm is to have done a summer associate stint with them. And then they decide to make you an offer or not, and you return the next year for your full-time job. I didn't do any of that because I didn't have any interest in it. But what happened was that I ended up becoming a client, a pro bono, a free client of one of the largest law firms in Washington. They had agreed to help set up the organization and help me with some of the book issues that had come up for free. And when they did that, I became a client. And I had a conversation with a partner at one point. I was saying, I was working at the Justice Department, said, I think I should quit this and go work full time at the organization that I want to set up. And she said, no, that wouldn't be smart. You don't really know how to be a lawyer yet. You need to be trained, coached, mentored. Why don't you come work here? And I was like, but you don't hire people like me. It was such a strange, And anyway, long story short, I ended up getting hired at this law firm. And nobody knew, nobody even asked. It was presumed you went to Harvard or you went to Yale. And I was like underground for the first 5 years at the law firm, trying to hope nobody guessed. Nobody knew I didn't really belong there or how I got the job or any of that, but nobody asked. And I ended up loving my work at the firm. And most importantly, it incubated me around how to access free legal representation. So it turned out to be a very important experience because what I learned when I was at the law firm is that law firms have a lot of money and they love to give associates training opportunities by having them work for free on low-income cases. And so when I then left the firm and went to Tahari full-time, we built our legal services model around leveraging the resources and the assets at big law firms. I wouldn't have known how to do that had I not had that experience. And then clearly it also taught me how to be a better lawyer, and there was a lot of training and mentorship that nonprofits just don't have the money for or the opportunity for. So there are a lot of things that happened that I did not plan. There are a lot of kind of career directions that I would say I even actively resisted. But I don't think we know always what's best for us. And sometimes it's hard to know what we're meant to do or what tests we're supposed to endure in order to develop the grit, the qualities, the skills, whatever it may be that the universe intends for us to have. I don't know that I would have ever willingly gone through some of the difficulties that I did. But thank goodness it wasn't up to me. It wasn't like my choice whether I would have that test or that difficulty. It was up to, the universe who decided you're going to go through this. You don't even know it, but you're going to develop this skill and you don't realize it, but you're going to need that skill here. And then you're going to use it here. It's such a mysterious, interesting process. But I do think that when we set our intentions doors do open. And what was consistent throughout my career and schooling was I had an intention to make a difference in areas of human rights and civil rights. The exact way that would happen in the exact space was not under my control. Now, obviously, I could have chosen to not walk through doors that were opened. And there were times when I resisted walking through different doors that were opened. But then what I learned, I'm still learning. I actually shouldn't say I've learned because I haven't completely learned actually. But what I am learning is that if I don't walk through those doors that open, there will be a kick in the butt from behind pretty soon after. And so it's kind of a good idea for me to try to listen to the door opening part and actually walk through. Because if I ignore it, more often than not, what happens is the kick in the pants to get me through that door if I'm not doing it by myself. So, you know, there are a lot of processes at work. But well, okay, so I'll I want to leave time for questions. I know that there's like a 25-minute talking intention. So just the last 2 minutes, maybe. The one thing I will say is really to encourage welcoming and embracing the tests that come our way, or discomfort, which is a form of tests. But to actively seek discomfort. I think, you know, when we're comfortable, and it's so human nature. It's not like nobody's an evil person if they seek comfort. It's our nature, really, to seek comfort. But it doesn't help us grow. And in fact, it can perpetuate negative things. It can perpetuate racism. You know, if we only stay in ethnic spheres that are super comfortable for us, it prohibits us from learning about different people. It prohibits us from breaking down barriers. It stops our own brain from unlearning prejudices that if you live in America, I mean, really, if you live anywhere in the world and you watch any kind of TV or absorb any kind of a media, we all have prejudice. We all have racism. It's just impossible not to. And so unless we're actively countering that, unless we're actively seeking other environments that are going to be uncomfortable, seeking conversations with people we disagree with, people who we think are bad, people who we think are wrong, people who challenge us and who aren't nice all the time to us, who maybe even call us out, point out things that are wrong with us, which is uncomfortable. But if we don't have that, we'll never know what we need to change. We'll never know how we come across maybe unintentionally. We won't know the wisdom that others can share with us. And we live in a culture, unfortunately, that I think really runs away from being disagreed with, receiving criticism, receiving feedback, being uncomfortable, staying in the room when conversations get hard, not giving up. We have a culture that almost glorifies estrangement. And like I saw on Instagram a meme that said, true courage is eliminating all the people in your life who don't give you good energy, or something like that. And I thought, that's like the opposite of courage. I just didn't understand that, because that's the easiest thing in the world to do, is just surround yourself with people who affirm you, who don't disagree, who are super comfortable for you, who don't have difficulties in their own lives, who aren't agitated or angry, or who have experienced oppression or maybe even victimization, which may not make them the easiest people to be around, all of these things. I think it's like the opposite that we're supposed to be doing in order to not only help ourselves grow and learn, but also to change the world and help the world be a more tolerant, understanding, and loving place. And we really need that right now. So I'll stop with those thoughts. And
Dear Layli, this is so wonderful. I think I'm sure that everyone here could sit for hours and listen to you talk. I was going to ask you to talk more, but we have already questions arriving, and I want to ask the friends to remind you that, at the bottom of your screen, you have the question and answer box. Please type in your questions and I will try to, we'll see how, hopefully we can go over all of them, but
and I can't see them,
no,
right?
well, you can see them too, but I am looking at them for
Okay,
you.
I
Okay.
don't see them. That's okay.
Yeah, so that you don't just, I'll read them for you.
Okay.
So, are there people or firms like yours actually working on this topic in African countries where the practices take place? What legal recourse do women in African countries like Kenya have to these injustices, even when they are illegal there?
When they are illegal in Kenya?
Yes, if yeah, that's what I understand. When these practices are these illegal practices and injustices in Kenya, uh, do people there have access to legal resource in Kenya, in African countries like Kenya?
So I think, first of all, let me say that there are a lot of powerful, amazing advocates um, all throughout Africa. And there are not a lot of big law firms, though. And there are some in South Africa. But so female genital mutilation is being fought on the ground by advocates who are often health workers, who are often coming at it from the perspective of health and women's empowerment, which has been a proven better way to address it. So female genital mutilation is illegal in a lot of African countries. I've just looked it up and it is illegal in Kenya. However, that's like meaningless. And the reason I say that is because, and it's true here in the United States as well, the law is helpful if you get out. It's really hard if you're a child to do that. If you can find a lawyer, really hard to do that if you can't afford one. And if you're not urban, in an urban area. And there are just all kinds of obstacles to actually using the law. There's also a harsh reality, which is that cultural practices like female genital mutilation, also like rape in the United States or domestic violence in the United States. So these things that happen behind closed doors in intimate spaces are very hard to control through legislation. So for example, in the United States, domestic violence has been been unlawful for many, many years. We have astronomically high rates of domestic violence. And so I love the law. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I think it's great. However, I want to appreciate the fact that we have to transform behavior, our values, our hearts. There's a lot of internal work around how women are valued, how women are viewed. Are they allowed to say no? Are they allowed to make their own choices that are even more important to tackle? It's good to have the law because there's some symbolic value to the country saying this is not okay. There may, for the ones who win the lottery ticket, so to speak, who can get out, who can get a lawyer, there may be an opportunity for them to protect themselves or defend themselves under law, which is great. Again, it's true here for rape victims or domestic violence victims. But as we know, unfortunately, those rates of prosecution are very low. The ability for somebody to pay for and endure the legal process is a real uphill battle. So there are all kinds of difficulties. And I think Americans sometimes, and I blame, frankly, all of the lawyer TV shows for this, where like the penultimate of justice is winning in court. Like we've developed this idea that what justice looks like is winning in court. But what justice looks like to a girl facing female genital mutilation is to not have to endure female genital mutilation. And if that comes through a court proceeding, fine. But statistically, the work that has been done, and there have been wonderful studies all throughout Africa that show that particularly women from those communities who are able to lead education efforts, these are kind of sex education efforts, health education efforts, and human rights efforts that elevate the power of girls to say no, that elevate the power of mothers to say no on behalf of their daughters, these kinds of things, that those are even more powerful interventions than simply having a law on the books. So just to give you one example, Egypt has outlawed female genital mutilation for over 20 years, and still 90% of the country, 90% of all women in Egypt have undergone mutilation. The law hasn't made a dent. So it's all of these other things that are equally, if not more important, when changing deep values, cultural practices, things that happen behind closed doors in intimate environments.
Thank you, Layli. Layli, you talked about, all how you looked at the profession, at the work of a lawyer, and what your assumptions were before you became a lawyer, and also talked about the problems with the legal system in the U.S. But regardless of the dominant culture in these spaces, we always have room for a counter narrative, right? We always have room to institutionalize different practices. And that is true for any profession, for any that is in our society, in our day and time, is dominated mainly by a culture of contest, and that one of our previous speakers talked about. What would you say are some basic core attitudes that are needed for us not to be overtaken by the dominant culture of a profession, of a working environment, so that we can undermine, we can resist, and we can, find the spaces where it is possible to do something different and to affect, to cause an impact in that institution, in that career, in that field?
Yeah, there's lots of opportunity for impact and for changing cultural norms. I think one of the first steps is to changing anything is increasing proximity. Brian Stevenson talks about this, and so it's not my idea, but Brian Stevenson, who's an incredible civil rights activist, and Just Mercy, a movie came out recently about him, but he talks about, anytime you want to change something, to help something, increase your proximity. So if you are wanting to address racism, increase authentic friendships with people of color, increase your proximity to those issues. It will help educate you, humble you, and make more authentic your engagement in any of those issues. It's the same for law firms. I had a prejudice about law firms, for sure. I believe people who worked at them had sold out. I believed that they were selfish places, materialistic places, all of these kinds of things. I had prejudices against the companies that they represented, all kinds of things. And then when I went to the firm and increased my proximity to the actual work, and my intention was like to disrupt it. Like I just wanted to pay off my loans, get a few years of experience, and I was going to be out of there. Like that was kind of my theory on it. And what happened was I ended up working with the kindest, most ethical human beings I had ever met. And I was really floored by the degree to which they went in order to maintain ethics in different situations, and how they would lose money because they maintained ethics over profit again and again and again. Now, I worked at Arnold & Porter, and Arnold & Porter is a law firm that's actually quite famous for its values and its pro bono. Arnold & Porter argued Gideon versus Wainwright. They were the law firm that they've argued many civil rights cases for free. And then they suffered when they did that. They represented, I forget the name of them, but it was a group of individuals that were accused of communism in the I can't remember, in the 1960s. Anyway, the something 5. But my law firm represented all of them for free, and then lost a ton of clients because the clients thought the firm was communist, this kind of thing. So I was lucky. I was really lucky to be in a place that had very, very strong values, particularly when it came to pro bono representation. I also realized that the people who worked at the firm were wonderful, wonderful human beings. They cared deeply about justice. They had school loans they had to pay off, but there's no shame in trying to pay off your school loans. And some of them wanted, lifetime careers in the corporate sector. But everyone I met also cared deeply about justice. They felt an obligation for philanthropy. They felt a responsibility for pro bono engagement. And I realized quickly that there had been such an us and them in the human rights world, and in particular the legal sector. And it was a disservice because them wanted to be us and us were them. Like it really was very not as separate. And so it was a really wonderful experience. And then when I was at the firm, I was also able to influence a lot of changes. By the time I left the firm, I did 50, so half of all my work was on a pro bono basis. I used millions of dollars of the firm's money in order to represent people who couldn't afford it. And the firm was very supportive and very happy for me to do that. We did a lot around caucuses for women, people of color. Well, I won't bore you with kind of some of the firm policies I was involved in, but yes, there are opportunities to change. But what we do know is that people don't want to hear us if they think we hate them from the beginning. So the adversarial kind of out of the gate, I'm going to be defensive because I can tell you're coming at me like you don't know me, and you're coming at me in a way that makes me feel like you've already sized me up, you've already judged me. You might be right about some of my faults, but it's clear you're not aware of some of my strengths. And I think that positioning, that adversarial advocacy positioning, very clearly never ever works. And also, just as a reminder, I did come from Martin Luther King's philosophy of social change, and he believed in unconditional love. He exemplified it. He was a fearless advocate for justice, never backed down, but he also never hit back. And he loved unconditionally. He forgave again and again and again. And it's just remarkable. I encourage you to read kind of the stories of his personal unconditional love as a tool of courage, as a tool of justice, and as a tool of transformation. And very unfortunately right now, much of our culture believes that those qualities of love, which, loving unconditionally is way harder than hating once you feel triggered, once you feel mad about something. Like it's easier to be conditional in your love, way harder to be unconditional. And his model and others, there are many others that have exemplified those qualities, and who are social justice warriors, who are unequivocal in their advocacy. We have a lot to learn from them.
Dear Layli, now, how would you suggest youth approach a career choice? I mean, should they do what they like, or should they see what is needed and do what they think is important, or just be open to what the universe brings them, or mix a combination?
I was going to say all of the above, I think. I mean, I think it's important to have a plan. The universe may change your plan, but it's important to have a compass. It's kind of like we're all sailboats, and you have to chart your course, and you have to set your direction, and you have to lift your sails. It's not enough to just hang out in the water hoping for a wind to come by or hoping for the current to take you. That will leave you aimless completely. You need to chart your course, lift your sails, which is kind of like build your skills, use your skills, put them out there. But then you're not going to get to control the wind. You can harness it and use it and navigate it, but you don't control it. You don't control the currents. You don't control the weather, all of these kinds of things. You will have to navigate all of that. And so that's being open, I think, to what the universe brings you. But it is important to have a chart, a goal chartered, and to begin setting sail in that direction. In terms of choosing that, I feel like it's an important thing to have a sense of the change you want to make in the world. or maybe put another way, what your contribution should be. You know, some people have phrased it as, if you died tomorrow, what would you want to be your legacy? What would you want to be able to meet your maker and say that you have tried to do? I think if we almost work backwards, like you think about that moment in your life or when it ends, then it becomes sometimes clearer what then you need to do in order to be able to say what you want to say in those last moments. But I do think that it is more about the difference you want to make in the world. You know, you want to invent something, you want to help people, you want to change a system, you want to change children's lives. You know, I don't know. What do you want to do? What impact do you want to have? And then back up into, okay, well, if I want to do this, if I want to invent vaccines, I'm going to need a medical degree, or I'm going to need a degree in this or that. If you want to promote justice, maybe you need a law degree. If you want to help people, maybe you want to become a social worker. But it's the what you want to do that comes first, and then the how you would do that is maybe secondary to that.
Thank you so much. I want to remind the friends that we still have time for a couple of questions. If you want to type in your questions in the question and answer box. We have a few more questions here also. What became of your first client?
So she's doing very well. She ended up getting married. She gave birth to triplets naturally. And they're 18 now, actually, her boys, 3 boys. She started a business. She has a store. It's a storefront where she sells lots of different things. She's good. She's well. Yeah.
You have mentioned overcoming adversity in life. Have you learned as much from failure as you have from success?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there have been a lot of failures when it came to the Tahiri Just, like different moments in time with the Tahiri Justice Center, or even just my own experiences, things I thought I was doing well and I was doing horribly at it, you know, and I learned that. Yeah, I don't know. There are lots of kind of micro examples of failure. And I mean, and big ones. I don't know what to say about that. I mean, I think, yes, the answer is yes. We learn from our failures. We learn our own qualities, our deficient skills we don't have, qualities we need to work on, things like that. But I do think, you know, people fail all the time and don't take the time to learn why. And I think that the people in my life who I really, really value are the people who almost on a daily basis are telling me why, you know, who I can see that didn't work out well, but it takes the courage of a friend. It takes the courage of a colleague. It takes the courage of a husband to say, I can tell you why that didn't work. And, you know, you could have done this better, and you could have done that better, and you could have done that better. And it is a gift. It's an absolute gift. But receiving feedback is a muscle. And I would say that in the early days, particularly of starting the Tahiri Justice Center, my muscle wasn't very strong. And I was easily crushed. You know, if somebody would criticize me or give me negative feedback, and I was like, you know, I would get mad at them, you know, like, oh no, you have the intention of bringing me down or whatever it may be. So I displace it rather than actually receiving and listening to what it was. Or the reverse would happen, where I'd just be completely crushed by it. I would accept every single thing that was said as absolute truth without any filter of, you know, well, that was one person's experience, that kind of thing. So I'd either like reject it 100%, or I'd accept it in a completely crushing 100% way. And I think it's like a muscle that I had to develop over time to receive with open arms. Somebody gave me an analogy that I really, really liked, which is to receive criticism and feedback as you would welcome a guest in your house. And welcome it with open arms. Keep your door open and say, thank you so much. I think anytime someone tells us something hard, it's super helpful both for us and for them if the first words out of our mouth are, that took courage for you to tell me. And I am so grateful that you trusted me with an opportunity to grow and an opportunity to learn. It helps because then it helps that person realize like, okay, I'm not going to be attacked. But then it also helps your own brain reorient around appreciation and acceptance. But the analogy this person gave me was welcome feedback and criticism with open doors, invite it into the front part of your house, to your foyer or whatever, and say, welcome, please come in. Thank you so much. Have that conversation. And then decide if you want to let it come into the living room or the kitchen or your bedroom or whatever it may be. But there can be filter. Somebody might say something based on one experience they've had with you or a very limited angle on you. And you can balance that against what other people think and other experiences you've had, but it doesn't have to be this all or nothing thing. It's like, let it into your foyer, welcome the feedback, and then decide whether it should come all the way in or not. So I would say that the biggest lesson in my failures has been to want to know why and to be genuinely open to hearing why this didn't work, and to see things I can't see on my own without help.
So another one is, how do you define success? Do you consider yourself successful? If not, is there an idea in your mind of the moment when you will consider yourself successful?
I think I consider myself successful the minute I can help someone. So, I don't, I think my biggest moment of success or feeling of success was definitely Fauzia's case and being able to help her. It occurred to me later, mostly because people had to explain it to me that it had farther reaching impact. But for me, it was really about helping her and knowing that I had helped someone else. So for me, that's the definition of success, is being able to make a difference in the life of someone. And that's when I feel successful.
This one's greetings from Bahia, Brazil. What advice would you give to someone who's starting a collective endeavor and wants to understand how to coordinate and structure the effort of many people?
Starting, what does that mean? Like starting an...
I think it's starting a collective endeavor, starting something that requires the coordination of the effort of bringing people together and then coordinating their efforts. What advice would you give to someone who's starting something like that? Okay, I think something similar to your initiative, to the Tohere Justice Center. Not necessarily that, but a collective endeavor, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, efforts are only successful if lots and lots of people are a part of them, and a lot of people help. And so it's a great question. And then, in terms of the Tahereh Justice Center's success, Tahereh grew over the years way more in spite of me than because of me. There were a lot of kind of seminal moments, pivotal crossroads, where I didn't have the answer and I really didn't know what we should do, and it was really unclear to me. And it was like the army, the community of people, all of whom were engaged, who had the answers or had the resources or had the connections. And so it's a great question, because that is the most important thing, is everybody who is helping. In order to have a shared vision, I think there's a balancing act between leadership and collaboration. There are some spaces where if it's like everybody's idea, it's nobody's idea, and then everyone kind of looks at each other and who's actually going to move forward and who's going to lead and that kind of thing. And so there is a role for leadership, but I think, at least for me at Tahereh, it's been like an iterative process where I would say, how about this? And then people would tear it down and add to it and give lots of ideas. And then it became a collective idea, but it had to start somewhere. And I think there is still a role for leadership. And it is true that sometimes it takes one to have an individual initiative that then can be clarified, improved, modified, and changed by a collective group, but it needs to start somewhere. And so I think it's important to have the courage to go ahead and put ideas out there, to say, what about this? Be willing to act on them. And then at the same time, to have the courage to hear why that's not a good idea and why others have better ideas, and what could make it stronger, and that kind of thing. Also, when people have the opportunity for input that's really meaningful, like you will change your mind. It's not just a tell me what you think, but I'm going to do what I want to do anyway. It has to be a really meaningful, input. When that happens, there's an amazing collective ownership that's then possible because everyone's invested. Everyone, they feel a part of it because they were and they are, and their ideas are in the final product or whatever came. And then you have a lot of amazing people who are supporting and executing the work and helping it get done. So it creates that ownership, which is very important. Consultation, discussions, all that's part of the process, I think.
Dear Layli, do you have time to take one last question?
Sure.
What lessons are you learning, perhaps personally, from your experience of our present worldwide pandemic?
This current situation with COVID-19 is terrifying and exciting all at the same time, I think, because it's terrifying, obviously, because people are suffering, people's health, people's lives, people's livelihoods, people's economies. A lot is in danger and a lot is shifting. The exciting thing is that we have this incubation moment, to the degree to which people are staying home, which they're supposed to be, of course, but not everyone can. And a lot of Tahari clients are forced to clean the hospitals and to continue to work. Also, many have lost their jobs. But we're having an opportunity to redefine who we are, to realize our interdependence. No border was going to keep this disease out. Borders matter far less than we have thought they did. We are way more one, way more interconnected than we realized. Also, the environment has been allowed a breather with the whole world has had this moment to kind of give the earth a break. So there's a recalibration there. We're having to really self-examine our healthcare systems. We're seeing inequity in much, much stark and clearer ways that will help transform humanity. The fact that people of color are way more impacted, way more harmed by the coronavirus is something that we need to wake up to and care about. The fact that so many people are now hungry, so many people were living on the edge already, and now this epidemic has caused people to plummet into poverty at very, very high rates. We are all worse off for these dramatic inequalities that exist. And so we're given a gift to see it clearly. We've been given a pause moment, also a gift to try to change the way we do things forever and to try to be better. My biggest fear, though, is that we're not going to learn those lessons. And my biggest fear is that we're going to go back to the way things used to be. I hope we never do. And I hope we learn a lot about our oneness and the inequity that was always there, but is now very clear and very harsh and life-threatening, and impacts all of us.
Thank you so much, Layli. Really don't have words to thank you for your time, for sharing all this information, knowledge, wisdom with us. And I want to remind the friends that tonight's presentation has been recorded, will be available hopefully in a couple of days on our website, sjcinitiative.org. And on May 23rd, we have Professor Payal Mahavan joining us and talking about justice in a world of extremes. Layli, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Take care.
The friends who joined us from Israel, Brazil,
oh, wow.
Spain, yes, Barbados.
Oh my goodness. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Take
Good night.
care.
Thank you. You too.